Enemies in Space Marine 2 are sorted into 4 categories. Minoris, which is cannon fodder that shows up in large numbers. Majoris is still quite common, but they're bigger and tougher. Quick note about Majoris enemies: on lethal difficulties they are capable of going into this frenzied state on occasion, where they'll become tougher and more stag resistant. At least it seems that way. I have no way of checking, it just, that's how it feels to fight them. Additionally, Majoris enemies are also capable of calling for backup, unless interrupted with gunfire or melee. Extremis are special enemies that require unique strategies to overcome, and generally have some special attacks that if you don't have teammates around for, it will screw you over. Terminus are mini-bosses or boss-level enemies. The Tyranids are a horde of Xenos vaguely resembling terrestrial insects. The entire Tyranid race shares one will, one mind, that of the Hive mind. Little is known about the Hive mind or the Tyranids, as their origins are from outside of the galaxy. What we do know is their objective, or rather the Hive mind's objective, it's to eat anything, and I mean everything. Anything and everything it can find. The giant hive ships that make up the bulk of the Tyranid forces will strip planets bare of all life, minerals, metals, anything it can consume before moving to the next planet. There's no long-term plan, there's no sustainability. That does not mean the Hive mind is stupid though. It's able to form incredibly complex plans, create entirely new Tyranid bioforms, and exercise a huge amount of energy in the warp, to the point that even the Chaos Gods fear it, as it blocks out their connection with their followers, starving the thirsting gods. It is unknown if the Hive mind itself is a physical being, just a, like a really big Tyranid, or if it is like a warp entity similar to the Chaos Gods. Either way, it has its sights set on the Milky Way, having sent many Hive fleets to consume it. The most recent one came from the lower parts of the galaxy, Hive Fleet Leviathan. Luckily, we're only facing a splinter group from Leviathan in Space Marine 2, but that does not make them any less dangerous or formidable. One of the many subspecies of Gaunt, and probably the most numerous, the Hormagaunts essentially act as cannon fodder, charging in with their scythe-shaped claws with no concern for self-preservation, relying entirely on pure numbers and ferocity to take down opponents. This is shown in game as they will usually be seen in large hordes, climbing up walls in large numbers, attempting to overwhelm you, and using the same horde technology from World War Z. And as far as I know, they're the only enemy in the game that they use that for, which is interesting and really cool that they went through that much effort. Rapid-fire weapons or a good use of explosives is ideal for keeping large hordes of them under control. You want to kill as many as possible before they get into melee range, as to not to get overrun. Even in low numbers, they are still capable of dealing damage, as they have a parryable pounce attack that will lock you into an animation and deal a bit of damage. If you're not caught off guard or overwhelmed, these pounces usually become a free kill. Hormagaunts are often led by their stronger cousins, the warriors, the death of which would usually result in the death of the Hormagaunts due to the synaptic link breaking. Additionally, if a really strong bioform is nearby, such as a Zoanthrope, they'll go into a frenzy, giving them increased speed and damage, and they'll be all glowy and have red eyes. Addendum, they can also be all glowy and have red eyes if they have a adrenaline gland on their back, which they will have on occasion. They'll have like glowing spores coming out of their back, and it'll only be certain members of the Horde that have that. Another variant of Gaunt, despite their name having Gant at the end of it, is the Termagant. While similar to the Hormagaunts in size and shape, they are nowhere near as bestial. The reason for this is they act as ranged foot soldiers, utilising biological guns called flesh balls that act as simple-minded soldiers firing barrage after barrage of acidic shots. While they won't run in as mindlessly as their Hormagaunt cousins, they aren't exactly smart or strong on their own. They still need numbers to get the job done, and because of their lack of bladed claws, they are much more vulnerable at close range. In the game, they are often seen patrolling or holding positions with ranged warrior bioforms. Their peppering of fire can be quite a nuisance because it can apply a poison effect to you that makes it difficult to see, but their numbers are nowhere near as high as Hormagaunts. But they are almost as weak. Spray and pray is still a viable strategy against them. Alternatively, you could kill any warriors that are undoubtedly shadowing them, which in all likelihood will just kill the Termagants. As with their relative, the presence of a Zoanthrope or similar bioform will lead to a frenzy, causing their damage and rate of fire to increase. Gargoyles are a flying gaunt species, usually equipped with flesh spores similar to their Termagant cousins. The ones seen in Space Marine 2 aren't equipped with such weapons and instead fill their secondary purpose: sabotage. Even compared to regular gaunts, they are very weak and frail because, they need to fly. So when unarmed, they rely on attacking structures like air vents, exhausts, and engines. They're like birds, but instead of one occasionally going into a turbine and knocking a plane out of the sky, hundreds of them do it on purpose. In the game, this usually translates to enemies covering an object and you have to shoot them off. They are incapable of actually directly attacking you, and because of that, I don't have much more to say on them. These little critters are one of the main forms Hive ships eat. They release these creatures and they scavenge and eat corpses, plants, metal, anything and everything they can get their little grubby hands on. Then they return to the Hive ships and get eaten themselves. It's the circle of Tyranid life. It's theorized that the Rippers may be some immature Tyranid, a Tyranid prime if you will. The reason behind that is, if the Hive ship has been bought off and the Rippers are just still there chilling, they will dig into the surface of the planet and transform into any number of Tyranid bioforms, from Hormagaunts to a Carnifex. The game, they are only seen in certain areas of the campaign where the swarm has already killed everything. They skitter across the ground, avoiding combat, and only attack when they climb together into the large balls that they charge at you. This would work if it was not for the use of a flamethrower cooking these bastard bugs alive. No real tips other than use the flamethrower. That's literally why the flamethrower is in the game. These bioforms are less intelligent creatures and more chemical mines. Spore mines float around for days, weeks, even years, long after Tyranids have left the planet. Their propulsion is thanks to a gas bladder, likely the same gas they release as they rupture themselves when any non-Tyranid entity enters their range. They lack any kind of real sentience, not even comparable to Rippers or Gaunts. They are more akin to a living object and dust floating in the air. I guess maybe jellyfish. They just sort of do things. They do what they're supposed to do. They often appear in groups, shoot them before they explode, as their gas can quickly fill a room, deal extraordinary amounts of damage, poison you, and then because there's all this gas everywhere, restrict your movement. The warriors are the backbone of the Tyranid forces. While nowhere near as numerous as the Gaunts, they are much more adaptable and intelligent. Their fast speed and concept of self-preservation alone with their stronger connection to the hive mind makes them both capable foot soldiers that can easily take on scores of guardsmen, and effective field officers that can direct the mindless ferocity of Gaunts and other bioforms. Because of their adaptability, they have adopted many different bioweapons, several of which you see in Space Marine 2. The first you encounter is two simple bone swords. The warrior wielding these bone blades will attack in combos and do attacks jumping forward from a distance that can be dodged. Conversely, they can do a parryable retreating swing that they'll use to duck in and out of combat as they desire. They're also quite difficult to deal with from range, as they will interlock their swords and use them as a shield to prevent themselves from taking damage. Use heavy ranged weapons like melters and plasma guns to damage them, or keep pace with their fast and agile combat dance to take them down. These warriors wield a strong bone whip that is devastating at mid-range. They're capable of landing attacks on you while you're just out of melee range via cracking the whip side to side, making getting into melee range difficult. They do have a strong parryable whip down attack, as well as a heavy pull-in attack that will wheel you in close. Ideally, you want to keep your distance and pepper them with bolts and plasma, as they have no way to resist range damage. If you're going into melee, close the distance before they can start attacking and keep time with their combo attacks. They'll only use the heavy if they're a few meters away from you, so up close and personal is the way to go here. Just avoid mid-range with these guys. The devourer is the stock standard range weapon of Tyranid warriors. A short to mid-range submachine gun type thing. At least it would be a machine gun if it wasn't a worm. It even fires worms. Worms that burrow into your flesh, eat through your nervous system, and V-line straight to your brain. Combat-wise, they pepper you with fire, similar to Termagants, which they are usually seen leading. Being a ranged warrior, they tend to jump around the battlefield to avoid gunfire themselves, and will usually stay at a distance. They're incredibly weak at close range, but engaging them in close quarters is difficult as they're usually at the back lines of the Nid forces, with plenty of melee warriors and Hormagaunts between you and them. I'd recommend long-range bolters, such as the Bolt Sniper, to take them down from range, or at the very least keep them staggered and unable to shoot you until another player can close the distance and finish them off. This weapon is the bane of many players' existence. The barbed strangler is used for suppressive fire. Said suppressive fire places down seeds that erupt into toxic barbed wire that can poison a space marine, resulting in temporary blindness. This is something all Tyranid weaponry can do, but this one is just worse somehow. The barbs can be destroyed by shooting the seeds before or after they hatch. A bolt pistol or any light arms is recommended to preserve ammo. Barbed stranglers also have quite an impressive range, especially compared to that of the devourers and the termagants, meaning their attacks are viable huge distances away. Either take warriors wielding these weapons down from afar as quickly as possible, or work your way up to close the distance carefully. While the Astra Militara might consider this an anti-tank weapon, to Astartes it's a sniper. Venom cannons have similar range to a barbed strangler, if not longer. They fire high damage, poison shots that can stagger marines. These shots are very clearly telegraphed with a biological laser sight emitting from the weapon, as well as a clear charge up of the cannon. They are not too difficult to handle if you're already in melee combat, as long as you keep your eye on their shot charges and prepare for a dodge. Due to the highly telegraphed nature of their attacks, they are quite easy to take on provided you're paying attention to them. These sandworm creatures are the Tyranids' eyes and ears, their trackers. Not only are their sight and hearing sensitive for burrowing, but it's also for tracking in vox signals and other electrical signals to home in on a target before springing forth from the ground. When not rabid and acting on instincts, they make great scouts for the hive mind, able to locate enemy positions from vox communication alone. In the game, they are not as powerful as described here. They can't see a Space Marine's camo cloak, perhaps it's superior given its Primaris armor, or specifically designed to counteract a Ravener's senses. Raveners will show up in the thick of the fight, pouncing out of the ground with an unblockable grab. If it manages to get you, it will wrap its tail around you and start cutting you to ribbons with its size while you try and break free. Fire support from fellow Marines can get you out of its grasp faster, but that doesn't mean the Ravener's done. It'll sliver across the battlefield, dealing deadly and constant combo attacks before eventually slinking back underground to attempt another pounce attack. They're easy enough to manage on their own, but with support they can sneak up on you in the thick of it. Dodging their underground attack and then engaging them in melee is recommended. They're fast, so you're not going to outrun them if they're on you. They can also leave a trail of acidic slime on higher difficulties. The quintessential assassin bioform of the Tyranids, Lictors share many similarities with the Ravener, the key difference being subtlety. Lictors have a biologically built-in form of camouflage, allowing them to do recon and sneak up on their prey. They're also quite agile, able to climb up walls and trees and pounce from them as needed. They're also much more directly controlled by the hive mind than Raveners, meaning they're a whole lot smarter and can exercise patience or even mercy if it benefits the Tyranids in some way. The latter is rare though. Usually, you won't even hear the squid-faced creature before one of its many scythe-shaped limbs is pierced through your chest. Beyond all that I just listed, they are also incredibly durable, usually hunting alone. Though in operations that changes as they'll be accompanied by other Tyranid bioforms and even other Lictors. In game they act similar to Raveners, but are more focused on hit and runs on more isolated players. They'll generally attack the backlines or an isolated player, whereas a Ravener will go straight for the nearest target. They have access to a heavy pounce attack, which will pin you to the floor, which must be broken out of or dodged. The ability to dash around the battlefield, climb and go camo are all quite concerning, but they are limited in their arsenal of attacks. Keeping vigilant of any attacks coming from behind and sticking close together will usually see them brought down quickly, ideally with a fast firing but decently accurate weapon such as a bolt carbine or auto bolter. These big brain creatures are emitters of the hive mind's psychic might. Technically speaking, their heads should snap their necks due to the lack of support, but due to their psychic powers they can counteract this issue. Because their entire focus is on psychic powers, they are incredibly good at multitasking, able to encourage and strengthen the swarm, provide a shield to a neighbouring Zoanthrope, and fire balls and beams of psychic energy at their enemy. There is a downside to all their power. Like human psykers, they're known to sometimes burn up. It seems the bioform isn't durable enough to handle its own power. In game this never happens sadly. They're quite frail, however even on lower difficulties they often appear in pairs. These pairs will have one shielding the other, alternating in between as time goes on. They also buff the gaunts around them, making them much stronger and faster, which becomes a real issue. Ideally one player should quickly focus down the one without the shield. This will take the other's shield down and make it easy pickings. They're not physically durable like other Extremis enemies, but they cause so much chaos so quickly that if your teamwork is poor, they can cut you up with buff swarm and pepper you with psychic attacks. These giant tanks of bone and carapace are the hive mind's wrecking balls. Unless supervised, these things are just as stupid, if not more so, than Hormagaunts. But these raging beasts don't exactly need intelligence, their pure size, durability and giant scythe hands make up for any lack of intelligence. The ones seen in Space Marine 2 aren't any normal Carnifex either, they are armed with artillery built into their back. They're such a simple blunt bioform with no complex role, they are just big Tyranids that can do big Tyranid things. In combat they are capable of doing various slashes, charges, and area of effect slam, and of course using their venom spines to deal damage from range, though that is rare and isn't a huge issue. Like the in-universe tips for dealing with these things, using heavy weapons such as a multi-melter or heavy plasma cannon are ideal for dealing damage, if not target the head with as much firepower as you possibly can. These are the bigger brains. If Zoanthropes are the 1%, these are the 0.1%. They're even more powerful, sharing a lot of the psychic attacks with Zoanthropes, but they're stronger, faster, and can summon in lightning from the sky. In lore their purpose is largely to be tougher psychic beasts and stop Zoanthropes from exploding, as unlike them, its body is large and strong enough to share the load of their psychic energy. They aren't completely free of issues though. On occasion they need to vent off psychic energy in waves. This means they lower themselves to the ground and are vulnerable. If you can dodge your way into melee range, you are safe from any of their attacks, Eye of the Storm and such. You can also just shoot them, they're not invincible, and nowhere near as armoured as, say, the Carnifex. They do fight from range and enhance the swarm though, meaning melters aren't going to work great. Focus rifles or any bolt sniper will do the trick when dealing with these big-brained monstrosities. Ah, if it isn't Curious George. If warriors are the officers of the Tyranid forces, then the Hive Tyrant is their general. They have a very direct link to the hive mind, which means they're astoundingly intelligent and can exert a large amount of control over millions, if not billions, of bioforms at once. They're no slouch when it comes to combat either. While big, they're no raging Carnifex. They move with elegance and speed, much like the warriors, even when thrown off balance by rebar in their back. Moreover, due to their strong connection to the hive mind, they have access to quite a powerful level of psychic might. While not likely to start slinging spells, they can enhance their already deadly attacks with warp lightning and can emit waves of warp energy when pushed into a corner. I'd imagine it naturally avoids focusing this much energy on psychic attacks because it takes its mind and synaptic energy away from directing the swarm, which is its whole purpose. In-game, the Hive Tyrant is an intimidating mission boss. Its first stage is Honesty, a bit of a fluke, feeling far too easy with a lot of telegraphed heavy sword and charge attacks, but when its health is low it releases its psychic might, healing itself and starting phase 2. Its sword attacks now send out shockwaves of warp energy, warp lightning falls from the sky, and similar to the Neurothrope, the Tyrant will release waves of warp energy that must be dodged through. During the second stage it will also constantly be summoning Tyranid reinforcements to protect it, so the whole battle becomes a clustered mess. Players should fill one of 3 roles while fighting it. One distracting it, another dealing damage, and another distracting the swarms of enemies it summons. Assisting each other when necessary, of course. It doesn't have any particular weakness to range or melee, though in the first stage it is quite weak to ranged attacks. Do be cautious with melee, if you do a lot of spamming you'll get clobbered. Remember, this thing is the size of a 3-story house. Pace your strikes for when it pauses, and make sure to dodge out of the way before it starts again. These giant creatures are the equivalent of an Imperial Warlord Battle Titan. To give perspective, the Warlord Battle Titan is 108 feet tall, walking battle church. While the Hierophant doesn't stand anywhere near as tall, it packs just as much of a punch. It has 2 gigantic acidic cannons on its arms, They are often deployed on the front lines of Tyranid assaults. Due to their powerful nature, they can evolve new weaponry as needed quite rapidly. Their cannons can just as easily turn into blades should they face a threat that decides to engage in a duel with a Tyranid the size of a small skyscraper. You don't get to fight this beast yourself, as there is no chance in the name of the Emperor's Golden Throne that you're even going to sting it. Instead, you assist with the charging and aiming of giant plasma cannons, of which the Hierophant can take upwards of 10 barrages of what is around 6 cannons. The creature isn't stupid, it will fire acid to cover the area between shots, but beyond that it isn't present. It's less of a boss and more of a gigantic set piece to shoot at. Still a great spectacle fight. The Thousand Suns are the 9th Trader Legion of the Adeptus Astartes, better known as Space Marines. Many people have very differing opinions on their downfall and subsequent fall to chaos, so I shall skip over that and get to the things you need to know. They're a legion entirely made up of psychers, meaning they're few in number, as they're named the Thousand Suns. Beyond that, they were also great scholars. Both of these things contributed to the corruption of Tzeentch. Now, the Rubric Marines have their own story. You see, they used to be ordinary Marines, or well, ordinary enough, as they were suffering from this thing called the flesh change, where their body would grow and lump apart, mutate, etc. A sorcerer by the name of Ahriman decided to fix this, which he did, for some of the most powerful sorcerers at least. Those with less psychic might found their bodies falling apart and turned into mindless dust that the remaining sorcerers can command. That's why the only ones that bleed and don't explode into a million pieces are the sorcerers. The rest are golems filled with a spirit that has no will of its own. Many mortals give their souls willingly to the Chaos Gods, and Tzeentch is no different. He is the god of change after all. What better way to change your lot in life than giving your soul to him? Perhaps he will smile kindly on you and give you powerful psychic abilities, or maybe he'll make your body collapse in on itself as your soul becomes a screaming Serpent of Tzeentch. While these cultists are brittle, they are just as well trained as any Imperial Guardsman. Which, I mean, technically isn't that well, but besides the point. Armed with humble las guns, or order guns, altered by the psychic powers of their Thousand Sun Masters, they now inflict grievous injury and devastating psychic damage that can cause even the most steadfast and chaos-resistant Marines to hallucinate. They are also equipped with grenades, and while often limply thrown, you should be wary not to walk right over them, as they deal a lot of damage. As to how to deal with the cultists, I suggest running into them. These are regular humans after all, just about anything will kill them in one hit, so don't waste your big guns on them. These guys come straight from hell. I swear Tzeentch trained these guys personally to ruin all of the fun we can have in the game. Armed with a lasgun, they can land shots from long ranges that deal high damage, stagger, and psychic damage. I remember these guys are still Minoris, unlike the venom cannon warriors, meaning they come in large numbers. Also being normal people, they are tiny and blend in with the crowd of cultists that they are usually surrounded by, but are way more dangerous due to the damage and stagger they dish out. Target the glints of their snipers and execute them quickly. One shot from anything should do the trick, which is well worth it given the trouble they can cause. There is no real lore on these things, but from what I can make out, they're essentially spirits that have been ripped out of the bodies due to chaos corruption, and are now just writhing around as they float towards the enemies of Tzeentch. They can burst from chaos cultists when a few of them are remaining in a squad, likely a punishment from Tzeentch himself. Lesser sorcerers are also seen summoning them as well. Their appearance is reminiscent of the dust of Rubrics, but all souls that are given to Tzeentch likely appear like this. These beakmen originate right from the current homeworld of the Thousand Suns, the planet of the sorcerers. Very original name. Whether they were beastmen originally or human beings is unknown. Either way, due to the influence of Tzeentch and the warp on the planet, they have been twisted into these beaked forms. Unlike other beastmen abhumans, they are actually very intelligent. Combined with their raw strength, they are the perfect foot soldiers of the Thousand Sun Thrall armies. While any old cultist is used as cannon fodder to be thrown into the grinder and die, these guys are used intelligently. They still go into the grinder and die, but what foot soldier in 40k doesn't? They are quite well respected by the Thousand Sun sorcerers, I'd imagine because there are so few of the Sorcerers, and you can't exactly have a conversation with Haunted Armor or give it a complex command. I imagine if Sorcerers attempt to talk to the average Cultist, there is a good chance they'd go insane. The Tzangors have the power and intelligence to handle the madness that is the warp, meaning despite them being lower on the combat pecking order as Rubric Marines, they're more important to the Thousand Suns than the mindless golems. Tzangors will often act in groups, attempting to overwhelm you. They're a lot more calculated and durable than Hormagaunts. If not aiming for the head, they can take up to 8 bolter shots at times. They'll try to surround you and wear you down, rather than bury you in bodies. They've even got an elegant leap attack that you can parry for a free kill. Use rapid fire or focus on their heads to take them down. Make sure to use a lot of heavy attacks in melee to stagger them, so they don't rip you to ribbons, because they can take a few more hits of a chainsaw than a Hormagaunt can. These shielded ones take up the frontal assault, being right at the front of a charging horde of Tzangors. They can block ranged and light attacks. Heavy melee, constant firepower, or a powerful weapon such as a melter will knock them out of their shielded state. Beyond that, they are identical to other Tzangors with the same attacks. Just try and take them down quickly or throw a grenade behind them, otherwise you might have trouble hitting the horde following closely behind. The new kids on the block, having only recently been added in update 5.0. They are the Thousand Suns' much needed melee focused Majoris enemy. That was a mouthful. They will zip around the edges of the battle on their discs before usually charging in with a parryable attack or a heavy spinning attack. That spinning attack technically has 2 variants, one where they spin or one where the disc spins. They're also capable of throwing spears at you. When they have a heavy indicator, be aware that these spears will explode after they hit the ground after a short delay. However, I would still describe them as a melee focused enemy, as they are more keen to charge in, back out, throw a spear, and then repeat. Engaging them from range seems to be the best way to do it, mainly because the sniper area kept killing them as I was trying to get footage. As far as their lore, which I've left till last, unlike every other enemy discussed previously, they are just more magical Tzangors, able to predict the future, or rather, see the strands of fate, and they also ride upon it on their discs, which is just more warpy nonsense. Because of this, they are amongst the most well-respected Tzangors in the Thousand Suns army, because they're, got a lot of magic bullshit. We've already gone over the Rubric's origins, the souls of Space Marines turned into mindless dust inhabiting a suit, so I'm not going to repeat myself. They're still just as dangerous as they once were. Despite not having the minds they once had, they still have an impeccable instinct for combat. Armed with just a bolter, the fact that their dust doesn't stop their use of the warp one bit. Their attacks are laced with corrupting magic that will make you hallucinate. They can teleport away and up close at will. They're capable of performing a magic stomp or supercharging their weapon with warp energies to deal huge amounts of damage. Realistically, 3 Space Marines shouldn't be able to take on hundreds of these things, but I guess the classes are technically named characters, so I'll allow it. Now, they are quite tough, but nowhere near as tough as Tyranid warriors are. That's not a joke, by the way. They have 280 health on lethal with a damage bonus of 1.5, because they are ranged units. Your standard melee warrior has 308 health on lethal, and you deal just 1, so there's no modifier to them on lethal, or any, because they're melee. Anyone who complains that Rubric Marines are too hard needs to learn 2 things. Aim for the head if you're using a bolter, and dodge to side to side when their eyes glow. They aren't constantly firing, and more often than not, they're teleporting around the battlefield. They're not actually that tough. Focus fire, people. These warp flamer bastards are a nightmare. Fair nightmare, given they have limited range, but still a nightmare. They will melt through your armor and health with a barrage of fire, which has to be their most difficult to deal with attack. Essentially, don't get up close with them unless you have a shield. Other attacks encourage this. They have an area of effect attack where they fire their flamethrower downwards, setting the ground ablaze, and another where they use their very magic to enhance the flamethrower for 3 powerful close-range bursts of fire, so stay away from them. Their flamethrowers only have about a 3 meter range, and if you're going to engage in melee, stagger them with a sprint attack and keep them staggered so that they can, unleash their flame attacks on you. The Scarab occult were members of Magnus the Red's bodyguard before the Horus Heresy. They utilize Terminator power armor, giving them a bulky appearance, but do not let that fool you. For unlike other marines that use this type of armour, they have the warp on their side, allowing them to teleport and zip around as need be. They're similar to the Grey Knights in that sense. The Terminator armour does not slow them down. Despite their power, many of them were Rubric, but they still maintain their combat prowess even in death. Encounter ones with a vicious soulreaper minigun in game, able to maintain devastating rates of fire but have limited turning speed while doing so. They also have access to a back shoulder mounted missile launcher which can track and rain down on you as you attempt to get behind them. They are at their weakest in melee, not being equipped for such things despite their sword in their other hand. They are not exactly fast with it. Their light and heavy attacks have very generous windows to dodge and parry respectively. Failing closing the distance, weapons such as the focus rifle on their heads will make short work of these dust-filled behemoths. These occult terminators traded the soulreaper for a powersword and a stormbolter. While the latter weapon is rarely used, the former makes them devastating. Without the soulreaper and the rocket back slowing them down, they can move incredibly fast thanks to their psychic abilities, using the powersword to do a range of attacks, some too strong to be parried. They're also capable of pinning a marine down to the ground and slashing away, though this is rare. Their super speed means no matter what you'll have to engage them in melee, so you either have to hold them at bay until someone with the proper means to take them down comes by, or engage in a ferocious dance of blades as they zip around attempting to get past your defences. Remain vigilant to their attacks and you should be fine. Just be aware they tend to zip from one player to the next as they like, so when one is on the field expect you'll get a taste of their blade. There are many sorcerers making up the Thousand Suns, but these guys are the weakest. The weakest of those who weren't turned into rubric golems, for not being magic enough. So yeah, they're still incredibly powerful, but weak enough that you could believe 3 Space Marines could take one down. They float and teleport around the battlefield with 3 eye shields protecting them. You'll never guess what to shoot to destroy these. While these shields are up, they can also fire psychic beams out of the eyes. They also have 2 other notable abilities. They can summon Serpents of Tzeentch to swarm you, and can rebuild any killed rubrics. Like the Zoanthrope, they are more dangerous for what they do to affect the battlefield rather than raw combat ability. They're pretty weak on their own once you get their shields down, though they do tend to teleport to safety as they're nowhere near as durable as the rubrics. Still being flesh and bone makes them quite susceptible to a quick death. Just be careful when up close, that stuff is for a lot more than just spells. They can hit you, so be on your guard. These giant metal chaos spawn were once dreadnoughts of the Traitor Legions, walking tombs of which barely living Space Marines would be enshrined to fight and then sleep for hundreds, if not thousands of years. The Traitor Legion's dreadnoughts weren't as unbothered during their sleep though. The warp twisted what little of their body was left and mutated them inside the dreadnought. This is naturally a painful process, leading to an angrier and more mobile dreadnought due to there now being muscles and flesh within their metal shell. The Thousand Suns Hellbrutes are even more dangerous than usual. As you know, if they have flesh, that means they haven't been rubricked, meaning that they are incredibly powerful psykers. Most of this psychic energy comes out in bursts of blind range, swinging a hammer around with shockwaves of warp energy. In addition, they can also teleport, which, for being a creature of that size and that sanity, is quite the impressive feat. Their regular hammer attacks are blockable, but they are so fast it is advisable just to dodge. All their warp-infused attacks are heavy and will create a small or large area of which psychic energy will charge up and then damage the player. In other words, don't stay in the glowing circle on the ground. They're capable of charges like the Carnifex, and have a ranged attack courtesy of the giant arm-mounted plasma cannon. It can be quite difficult to dodge due to them firing it in multiple rapid barrages. Try and dodge into cover as it can quickly melt through your health bar if you are not paying attention. As for taking them down, headshots are almost impossible due to the size of their heads and then, the size of them. Utilize high damage weapons that don't require precision, such as an auto-border or a heavy plasma cannon, or a multi-melter. Helldrakes are part war machine and part demon. I suppose, more accurately, they're a war machine that's possessed by a demon, but not often by the demon's will. Either way, they're essentially just giant metal dragons that bring down warp fire all over the place. In game, you encounter one just sort of sitting on top of a warp beacon like it's a nest as it breathes fire at you. It's like the Hierophant Bio-Titan, where it's all about pressing buttons to damage it as it just sort of attacks from afar. More of an objective boss about spectacle than, any real enemy. You just have to activate relics and then open fire at it until it dies. Imara appears to be a member of the Cult of Duplicity. One of many Tzeentch cults in the Thousand Suns, they focus on manipulation, which he does a lot of. Also, his staff seems very similar in shape to their symbol. Beyond his great manipulation abilities, he's no slouch when it comes to sorcery. Being able to take on 3 named Space Marines with their helmets off is no small feat, along with Marius fucking Caligar. He's so powerful that he can command or deal with a greater demon of Tzeentch, the Changer of Ways. In case you are unaware, demons, especially greater ones, aren't known for being fans of mortals, let alone working for mortals. He's quite an impressive Thousand Suns character, avoiding being a completely useless sad sack, and is actually menacing. He also has 2 rather good boss fights. One has 2 stages, with the first starting him out on his disc as he fires lasers around, and opens the occasional rift into the warp, during which you have to take cover behind these pillars. He also has the usual Serpents of Tzeentch and the other abilities sorcerers have. Once off his disc, he'll start zipping around, casting bolts and teleporting close range to hit you with light and heavy style scythe attacks. He'll also make copies of himself throughout it to throw you off. The second encounter continues off that moveset with the addition of him teleporting you to the void for some one-on-one time, and a Lord of Change attacking from afar on occasion. Fun boss, not all that hard though.